order the special meeting of the SORTA board here on Wednesday, July 29th. Thanks everyone for coming. Why don't we start off with the Pledge of Allegiance? Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. I think that's always hard to do virtually with the right thought there. So I know special meetings are hard, and I do apologize that we didn't get this documentation out earlier. In trying to talk to the city to get something that made sense. So we have an hour, which I think should give plenty of time to answer questions. And if we're unable to answer them, obviously we need to continue the discussion. The idea at a high level here, right, is that we're making this transition of funding sources, and so really kind of making a transition of control over SORTA. So what do we do about the assets that the city owns that we rely upon? How do we have discussions about assets that could be in dispute, those kind of things? And how do we make sure we have a system that can run effectively going forward? And so that really is what this is all about. We know these sort of transitions between governmental agencies can be challenging. I think this is a good solution for all that lets us work going forward, and really protects bus riders and lets us do the job that we intend to do. I've asked Daryl to give a few comments on his thoughts on how this affects the ability to operate or not operate the system. And then Kim's available, I believe, to kind of answer any questions about the document. Maybe take us through slowly what some of the key points are. Daryl, you want to start?
I was just looking for my mute button. Kim will kind of talk about the gist of the agreement. And one of the questions that will come up is how do we manage through what the agreement says. What I will tell you is that the Reinventing Metro plan, it increases the amount of miles and hours that we currently run. As you guys will remember, there's 6 routes with 24-hour service. Almost all of the routes have increased frequency, and there's new crosstown routes. We haven't actually done the run cuts for all of those yet, but I imagine we're probably looking at 30 to 40% increased miles and hours inside the city of Cincinnati. So an agreement that holds us accountable to the amount of miles and hours that are in the current service is very, 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 very doable because we are in growth mode and we will be growing the system at a pretty large clip with Reinventing Metro. The other thing I'll mention is that the current property value, the county property tax value of Queensgate is $8.8 million and Bond Hill is $5.8 million. So as I look through the agreement, we can manage through this without any challenges.
Okay, do you want me to go ahead and just do a high-level run through the agreement?
I think that would be everybody, yeah.
Okay. So, again, like Craig and Daryl have said, basically what the gist of this agreement is meant to do is to take any assets that the city believes they still have claim to, which they do have the real estate for Queensgate and Bond Hill is in their name. So it will transfer that real estate and any interest they believe they have in our rolling stock or any other assets to us. And in exchange, we've agreed to maintain that minimum level of service in the city that is there right now. So if we need to change that minimum level of service, you will see that's all laid out in section 4. We need to get approval of city council. So if we need to eliminate a bus stop, or we want to change a route permanently, we'll go to city council for that, and they have, they'll need to approve or deny it within 45 days. There are exceptions for temporary routing changes, due to construction or an emergency or something that needs to be enacted quickly. We do not have to go to city council if it's just a temporary change, which is 90 days. Also, we can relocate a bus stop if it's within a quarter of a mile of its existing stop without asking city council approval for that. And again, this is just with respect to routes or stops that are within the city limits. It's not the entire service. It's the city, wants to ensure that we preserve service for those within the city. This goes on for so long.
Can just be clear, so and change means a decrease to the miles and hours that are being run on a route. So you could move the timings of the route and things like that around as well.
Yes, you can do that. Yes, but if we change the miles and hours, and we decrease that, then we have to go to city council for approval.
Decrease below what is currently in place, which is far less than obviously what we're going to build towards, right?
Correct. Yes. Correct. I also want to mention, I neglected to mention this, that not only is this transferring property in exchange for this, but it's also transferring whatever is left in the transit fund that has not been used at the end of this. So we've asked that it be at least a minimum of 1.5 million. So whatever is left in that transit fund, the balance will now be transferred to SORTA and not used by the city for any other purposes. That's basically the gist of the amendment. Again, this is just an amendment to the 1973 agreement, and it does say that anything else that was in the 1973 agreement with respect to fares or routing changes is now superseded by this. There are a couple of other sections that will also need to be superseded, and that's it.
The other thing it does, right, is it agrees that fares won't be higher in the city than it is in the rest of the county, which it's been historically lower, and the plan is to move to a common fare structure in any event. But I want to make sure people recognize that.
Hey, Kim, from a property asset standpoint, is this step one of two where they're transferring it to us and then we'll end up transferring it to the county, or no?
No, this will just transfer it to us. The county hasn't asked to hold this property, to my knowledge. I mean, it would be, as it stands right now with respect to Queensgate and Bond Hill, SORTA pays for everything on those two sites. So it's just transferring the title by a quitclaim deed to us, and then SORTA would hold the property.
The one thing I'd like to add is because of all the challenges we've had with the pandemic we're going through, those dollars that are at the city for the earnings tax, it's real important that we get all of those dollars to make sure that we don't have to delay the Reinventing Metro plan longer than we need to, based on the reduction in revenue that we're getting because of the pandemic.
I don't have Mr. Chairman, can I make a comment?
Yeah, I'd like everyone to ask questions and make comments, because I know this is a lot to take in, and it probably seems a little overwhelming, but I think, let's get clarity for everyone.
Well, yeah, and let me, maybe a perspective here that I hope if I can be indulged for a second. First of all, I want to offer commendation to you, Mr. Chairman. This is a negotiation that is not simple. We knew that when we passed the levy that there would be various levels of transitions. The board is going to change in terms of our structure because it will be a county-appointed board going forward. But we knew that we had this agreement between SORTA and the city that would need to be worked out. And you entered into what I would consider an incredibly complex negotiation. And you did an incredible job at getting I think, an agreement that the entire community should look at and say, this is a great result. And you quickly alluded to the fact that there are other government entities in town where they have had multi-year, incredibly expensive and litigious arguments over who owns an asset, whether it is a pipe or a building. And those things have led to, I think, a government environment that isn't always as effective as it could. And what's happened here is that in this transition between the city and and our organization, SORTA, the assets are being transferred in a way that the taxpayers should be incredibly happy with. We are not going to have to pay cash to the city, which was certainly an option that was on the table when the levy passed in terms of the fact that they owned the real estate. We are going to get all of the transit fund dollars that are important to us to be able to run the organization and build Reinventing Metro. And then from a going forward perspective, we're keeping a promise to the voters who passed the levy. And we've created a structure here that you helped lead and that Daryl made some great comments about, enables us to build on top of a system, but also make sure that we're protecting routes and protecting the riders who have been a part of this system for 5 decades. And the only money that is changing hands here is money that is coming out of the transit fund to our organization, which we have made claim to and said that we need. So when I look at this from a big picture and think about all of the different ways that this could have gone sideways, or that this could have impacted our organization and our ability to quickly begin to ramp up Reinventing Metro, I'm impressed. And so, Mr. Chair, I know that you had a number of meetings and phone calls about this, and they were not always, well, let's just say that it was a complicated negotiation, and you did a fine job. And so I appreciate your leadership on this. It was certainly a moment when I was very glad that you were the chair of this board, and so I'm excited to vote yes.
Well, thanks, Brendan, and really the staff should be commended for the hard work. And but I do appreciate that. I do think it is a good solution, but I want to make sure everyone understands it and that we address any questions.
I have a couple questions. We talked. I'm glad that there's wording around keeping minimum service in the city. I think that's really important. Curious if, like, as people, over time, population changes in different neighborhoods, and we may need to reroute to maintain that level of service. Knowing that needs to go to a vote of city council, where does that fall in kind of the traditional change of service process? Would that be after the publicly held meetings that we need to hold? Do we have a sense for what that would look like? I'm just trying to understand timing and like how agile we are.
Yes, we would hold public meetings like we normally do. We would get all the feedback from those customers, and this would only be in an event where we're reducing service, not from the Reinventing Metro plan, but from the current service today, which we know the Reinventing Metro plan will add a lot more miles and hours to it. So only in the event that it is reducing service from our current service today, we would then get the feedback from the public and then go to city council and talk to city council about the changes that we wanted to make.
Okay. What if we need to reroute a line to improve service?
As long as it's not less miles and hours from our current service. So if we're rerouting a route, chances are the miles and hours are the same. And again, these are miles and hours of our current service, not the increased Reinventing Metro service.
Right, and so you can change every stop by a quarter of a mile, so you could adjust some routes. I think the other thing is we have to, I know this doesn't come off as being funny, it's not intended to be, but we have to assume that council will be reasonable too, right? If there's a better solution for the citizen, we have to assume that they're going to want that too. I think there's always a challenge, right? When you take some stops away or things. We've just gone through this massive stop adjustment, and what I would tell you is really anytime any group of citizens came back and said this is an important stop, we kept it. So I think that it probably sounds more ominous than in actuality it might be.
No, that's fine. I just want to clarification. And then I think you mentioned this, but I had some very loud coworkers with me, so I apologize if you have to repeat this. And I know there's language in here around fare increases, but in the like, and I know we're redoing fares with the reinventing Metro process, but I also know that traditionally, to increase fares, we would have to go to a vote of city council. So, you know, hopefully we don't ever have to do that. But just curious, is that in this agreement, or like how might that work?
Right. So, sorry.
Go ahead, Kim.
No, so what all the requirement with respect to fares that is in this agreement is that we will not charge any higher bus fares in the city compared to non-city service areas. And then towards the end of the document, let's see, in 4H, it specifically says that all requirements for city review and approval of changes to routes and fares that aren't expressly set forth in this amendment are gone. So that process where we used to have to go to city council will be eliminated.
How are those equivalencies of fares calculated?
Currently, we have a fare in the city and a fare in the county. In the Reinventing Metro plan, we're going to have one local route fare. So there won't be different fares. There'll be a local route fare. There'll be an express route fare. And then there'll be a county for Warren, Butler, and Claremont fare. So there'll only be those three fares. And then, of course, the downtown circulator has a separate fare. So in the future, there will be one fare for all local routes, both in the city and in the county.
Right. So how is the comparison of city to non-city fares calculated in this agreement in order to be sure that the relationship between those fares doesn't violate the agreement?
So the agreement just says the county fare can't be more expensive than the city fare. I'm sorry, the city fare can't be more expensive than the county fare, but SORTA will determine what the fares are. We will no longer need to go to the city to increases or fare changes. It will be done by this board.
When you answer your question, Blake, I feel like we're talking past each other.
Yeah, so like if we were to make the fares equivalent between the city and non-city areas, would that ratio would change, right? And so then effectively we would be charging the city more
No,
than
you're.
non-city areas. I'm just asking the question. I got
think
this document this morning and I'm trying to understand exactly how it works and all the consequences.
So
I hear what you're asking, which is, let me see if I can ask it the same way. Are you saying that, like, if the total amount of fare collected from the city doesn't equal the county, then the ratio would be in violation? Is that the question?
Well, maybe put it this way: if we set a single fare and that actually resulted in a reduction of the fare for a non-city rider, then effectively that ratio is off, and we are charging then the city more in comparison.
There's nothing about.
You see what I'm saying? I'm just trying to understand.
Yeah, no, there's none of the ratios. It means that local fares will be the same. The local fare rate can't be higher for city routes than they are for the rest of the county. So it's just
The concern was that somehow the SORTA board would start charging a higher rate in the city than it would outside the city. Like that was a legit concern.
That is what it's protecting against. And right? As long as you get into contracts, right, is that people start imagining the worst as opposed to and yes, I believe that was the concern, and I cannot imagine there would be a situation where that would.
Yeah. And I think I'm maybe approaching this from that perspective of being concerned about what's the worst that could happen here. And, so, if we were to go about that simplifying a fare structure, based on my initial reading of the document, the city council could actually oppose that. And that would, I have no interest, I don't think anybody on the SORTA board does, for charging higher fares to people who live in the city or people who are boarding in the city. I'm not sure exactly what it would be. But like we have to be prepared that there could be a conflict over simplifying the fare structure, and we could be stopped from doing that out of this agreement.
No, I appreciate that, and I see where you're coming from on that. But I think having gone through it, it is clear, and maybe Kim, you can back this up, that the only thing that this says about fares is that we can't have the two zones like we have now for Hamilton County. So you can't have somebody who lives in Oakley paying $1.75 to go from Oakley to over the Rhine, and somebody who lives in St. Bernard paying $2.25 to go from St. Bernard to over the Rhine. The key is that we're going to have one county fare, which is what we promised voters. And that if we ever got to the point where we wanted to have a higher fare in the city, which obviously I agree with you would be a preposterous idea,
Yeah.
that in and of itself would be something that city council, but no other fare structure, so long as there is only one fare for the county.
It actually doesn't prevent you from having a higher fare outside the city, but conceptually.
I wonder if it would be better to focus this agreement on that simplified fare structure as opposed to this kind of disagreement about city versus non-city rates, and just say this is what we're planning to do in reinventing Metro. And if we don't do that, then there would have to be some sort of review or amendment or something like that. That seems to make more sense and is more in line with what we're trying to do. Along those lines, I have some other concerns, and a lot of them are coming from just reading the document for the first time this morning. And I think a lot of them come along with some of the concerns Heidi was bringing up. With if we eliminate one route, we're replacing it with a different route, then City Council would be able to review that and say, no, you can't do that. You can't eliminate that route, even though we're trying to improve service. And it's not clear to me what the resolution would be to that. If the SORTA board had decided this is the best way forward and had gone through all the proper processes to do that, and City Council says, no, what happens? We have to stick with the old route, the route that the public had commented on and SORTA board had decided on was the right way, and the administration had decided there was the right way. What would happen there?
You would have to stick with the same route.
Well,
So there's no impact.
Oh, no.
I'd like to add a comment about that. Based on some of the conversations that I had, the biggest concern is that SORTA sees a bigger opportunity to expand in the county, and some of the smaller bus stops in the city that people have depended on for years disappear because it doesn't make as much sense as the expansion in the county. And I think that it's really important that we address the fears that the city has that we don't do anything to reduce the fares or the bus service as we expand, that the small guys don't lose out. That the people that really depend on the bus don't lose that piece of their livelihood, which could happen.
Is the notion then that the SORTA board is not interested in doing that, and that it has to be protected by some other entity, the City Council?
No.
I mean, what's the role of the SORTA board? I mean, that's what we do. Like, that's what we want, and I think everybody on the board wants to do exactly that. So why move this power outside the SORTA board to control routes and to make decisions about routes and to protect our riders? It seems like that power should stay with the SORTA board. That's what we're here to do.
I would have a little different perspective on it, obviously, because I don't think that we're giving up power. I think that we are working with a jurisdiction where we run buses who has made up the core of this system for a long time, and frankly where most of the riders are right now. And I I don't envision an environment in the future where if we wanted to change a route, for instance, that was not performing and add to a better route, that we wouldn't be able to go to, the jurisdiction that we're in negotiation with and say, look, this is our plan. We've vetted it through the public. We've talked to people, and then have out of a point of peak that body then say, sorry, you're not allowed to do it. Because the alternative then is something more popular that we've chosen to do because we're the SORTA board and we know what we're doing, then wouldn't be able to go into place either. So I think that actually we wind up with a pretty good amount of leverage. And then what I would say is that recall what we're getting for this. And what we're getting from this is we're getting to extricate all of the real estate and the transit fund that we need to be able to operate to go forward for a pretty small promise to make sure that we're protecting service in the core of the city.
Could I get a little clarification too on the claims against the property and the rolling stock? Like if we didn't have this agreement, would the city take control over all of our buses and the facilities, and we would have to start anew?
I think it's fairly clear that the real estate is owned by the city, so that has to be negotiated in one way, shape, or form, whether that's rent or purchase, etc. The buses do not acknowledge the ownership over those assets, so that's in some dispute. I think what this does is rather than get into an ongoing dispute, potential litigation there, it makes it clear that the city agrees with our perspective.
Okay. So the outcome would be a long dispute.
Potentially. I mean,
Potentially take reinventing Metro, delay it by years, and have some real negative consequences for what we're trying to do, which is to serve all those people riding buses in the city and having them get where they need to go. Gotcha.
Yeah.
So that's what the city is threatening. Okay.
I don't know that threatening is the right word, Blake, but it's certainly a topic that's out there.
Do you think they have the willingness to do that in the negotiations?
I don't think it's outside the realm of possibility.
Okay.
And I do understand your point on the board's job is to identify the best use of the system, working with the administration and having public comment and things. And I do believe that all that, the assumption of council going against that would be that, they're choosing a lesser option. I'm not sure that's a reasonable assumption, although I think the dialogue with the representatives is probably got here. But I understand it, sir.
So, my initial reactions on this is that I need more time to read it and think about all the consequences before I can support it. I mean, this is really, really important. And I'm not saying a month or two. I'm saying give us a little bit more time to think about this to make a decision about the right thing.
Yeah.
And I just want to push the idea of the SORTA board and the SORTA administration are the ones trying to do this work. And there will be representatives from the city on the SORTA board. And I would think that that's exactly what they would be doing on the SORTA board. And I'm really uncertain about adding what could be a 90-day process, and then if there's a disagreement, a much longer process to changing routes and making service improvements. And all I want to do is serve the riders the best way possible. That's all I want to do, and I want to make sure we have a system that does that and doesn't get wrapped up in some sort of conflict that could be protracted for years and stop us from changing service. So I don't want to make this decision quickly because these types of agreements that deal with multiple levels of government have a way of becoming sources of conflict. and sources of problems for the service we're trying to provide.
A couple things, just great points. One is, I think you do have to remember the starting point of this would be, we're planning to add 40% more service, broadly into most of the routes. So the point of conflict, I guess, could get into some of the details, but you'd have to have a substantial reduction before you got to the point where you had to go to council, right? The other reason this got rushed a little bit is that if we want to ensure we get this other money from the transit fund, we were trying to get ahead of the budget discussions at the city next week. So if we have to have a lot of time if we want to get that couple $1 million.
And I might just contend. I think always it's better if we have a little more time. But Mr. Chair, I think that I know that you have been working on this with the administration and with Ms. Schaefer for several weeks, and more than several weeks, and that the administration has had a long time to have a deal that is recommended to the board. And our role as a board is to look at the big picture of this and say, does this set our organization up right for the future? And then vote on it. It's not for all of us to negotiate specific of it. The big picture thing that gives me comfort here, and I wrestle with this, but the big picture thing that gives me comfort here is that we spent the last 2 years promising others that we would deliver the Reinventing Metro program. This agreement that we can make today in the city is incredibly advantageous to us financially. This agreement that we are making today doesn't even commit us to the Reinventing Metro program, which, by the way, that could have been part of the negotiation. It just commits us to doing what we do today and sets up a process that if we want to change what we do today, we have to talk about it. And what we spent time, and I went to any dozen number of meetings asking for people to vote on this. We said we would provide this service to voters over the next 10 years, and they agreed with us. And so having it be part of a contract that is financially advantageous to us does not bother me, because it's frankly something that we've been promising for the last 2 years.
To make sure we get everybody's perspective here. Kathy, any thoughts? Nope. I think you're on
No,
mute.
it sounds like a fair agreement to me.
Okay, thank you. Glenn, you made a couple comments, but any other questions? Or
I think we have to also give not only the staff and you, Craig, but also the mayor for working through this as well. So, in spite of everything, I think it's a good contract. I've asked a lot of questions, Craig, now, so that's why I've got mine answered, and I'm glad, Blake, that you're asking yours now. But I did ask my questions. I feel comfortable.
Heidi?
I'm fine. I feel very comfortable.
Okay. Mary, I know you made a couple comments, but anything else?
Absolutely agree. I think it's come so much farther than I ever dreamt that it would, with so many people involved in it. And I appreciate everybody's efforts to make this a positive result. We've had enough negative over the last few years to get to where we're at. This is pretty exciting.
Roger?
If this is one of those agreements or endeavors where I say don't let perfect be the enemy of good, and so I think that this is a good agreement that has to happen, and is positioning us for all the things that we promised and the appropriate transitions. So for me, I'm good.
Okay. And I know it's a complicated situation. I know that, any of these things that require multiple folks talking to each other gets complicated. As I mentioned before, really worked hard in trying to give the power in this discussion to the administration so that we could make sure we had a system that could operate effectively even with these promises. And so I'm comfortable because Daryl and team are comfortable that it's workable, and that the fact that we're intending to add so much service gives us a little bit more flexibility than maybe it feels like in the start, and that it lets us get on with the work of moving ahead. I do agree, Blake, we can make sure, and I don't think it dramatically affects the agreement, that the fare structure language is maybe a little bit clearer to ensure that it's, like fares are the same. And I agree that it seems to be protecting against something that doesn't feel very likely to happen. But any other comments from anybody? I know we've had a pretty robust discussion.
Thank you for listening to my concerns. I see this as such an important point for this service going forward. That I think it's really valuable to examine all the possibilities and make sure that we don't have any. Sorry, I got other calls coming in. We don't have unforeseen consequences that limit our ability to serve the public. So, thank you for listening to my concerns.
Well, I think as we finalize this, right, council's going to have discussions too. And so I think in general, right, what we're giving is the authority to finalize these negotiations appropriately. But I think if there's no other comment, I could probably take a motion, or I will so move that we.
I'll second.
Okay. So properly moved and seconded. Chanel.
Mrs. Black,
Yes.
Mr. Cole,
Yes.
Mr. Etheridge,
No.
Mr. Hinton,
Yes.
Mr. Cassie,
Yes.
Miss Miller,
Yes.
Miss Robinson.
Yes.
Yes. The motion passes.
All right, so we'll work to finalize that with the city and continue to take all these concerns into account. I appreciate the great discussion, and I know we all want the best to happen for the riders in the community. So I appreciate all that input. Look forward to next couple of discussions around finalizing these policies we talked about, finalizing the integrated committee work, and continue to be prepared for October. It's coming up fast. Okay. I move we adjourn.